The evening air outside carried the soft hum of passing cars, a familiar suburban soundtrack. Inside, the Harper household was warm, the glow of soft yellow lights casting a peaceful aura over the neatly arranged furniture and carefully placed family photos. It was the picture of stability, of a life built on love and commitment. Or at least, that's what I used to believe. I sat at the kitchen island, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, staring blankly at the granite countertop as if it held the answers to the nagging unease inside me. I had always prided myself on being a logical man. I built bridges, designed structures meant to endure pressure and time. My marriage, I had thought, was one of those unshakable structures. But lately, I had started noticing the cracks. It began with little things. Mornings when Rebecca barely acknowledged me, her once affectionate kisses reduced to quick, impersonal pecks. Evenings where she spent more time glued to her phone than talking to me, her fingers flying across the screen, a soft chuckle escaping her lips at something unseen. At night, she turned away from me in bed, her body distant, cold, like we were strangers. At first, I convinced myself it was work stress. She had a demanding job, meetings, deadlines, constant pressure. I told myself she was just exhausted. But those excuses wore thin when her so-called business dinners became more frequent, stretching later into the night. And then there was the perfume. Rebecca had always worn soft, elegant scents. Lavender, vanilla, subtle fragrances that lingered in the air like whispers. But lately, she came home cloaked in something heavier, something bold and unfamiliar. It wasn't hers. And it sure as hell wasn't mine. I tightened my grip on the coffee mug. "You're overthinking it," I told myself for the 100th time. She wouldn't. She couldn't. But the doubt had already started burrowing inside me, gnawing at my peace of mind, sinking its teeth deeper with every new inconsistency. It was our neighbor Tom, who unintentionally planted the final seed of suspicion. "Hey, Ethan," he said one morning as we both stood by our mailboxes, the sun casting long shadows over our driveways. "Thought you were out of town last weekend." I frowned, gripping the stack of envelopes in my hands. "I was. Business trip to Chicago." "Why?" Tom hesitated just long enough to make my stomach tighten. "Oh, no reason. Just, noticed the lights were on late at night. Figured Rebecca had company over or something." His words hung between us, thick with unspoken implications. I forced a tight smile. "Yeah, probably just some friends." But the thought had already taken root, settling in my mind like a splinter. Rebecca wasn't the type to host friends over late at night, especially without mentioning it to me. The idea of her in our home, entertaining someone while I was miles away, sent a slow burn of unease through my chest. That morning's drive to work felt different. The streets were the same, the stoplights unchanged, the skyline unshifting. But my world had tilted just enough to make me feel like a stranger in it. Meetings blurred past me, emails went unread, and numbers, usually so easy for me to process, became nothing but meaningless figures on a screen. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that carried weight. Moving through the rooms with careful steps, I scanned my surroundings, looking for something, anything, that felt out of place. But everything was in its usual spot. And yet, something was off. My eyes landed on the couch in the living room. The cushions were perfectly smooth, as if someone had taken care to erase any trace of disturbance. But the air still held a faint scent of cologne. Not mine. My stomach tightened. Over dinner, I watched Rebecca closely. She barely looked at me, scrolling through her phone between bites of salad, absently stabbing at the leaves with her fork. "You're quiet," I said, keeping my tone even. She glanced up, startled, like she had forgotten I was sitting across from her. Just tired." I studied her, how she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she had since college. "Tough day?" I asked. She shrugged. "Meetings. The usual office drama. A well-rehearsed script." I nodded, setting down my fork. Tom mentioned seeing the house lights on while I was gone. The fork in her hand froze midair. A pause. A fraction of a second too long. Then, smoothly, she resumed eating. "Oh yeah. I had the TV on late. Couldn't sleep." A perfect, casual response. Too perfect. I forced a smile. Right. She returned to scrolling through her phone. Conversation over. That night, long after Rebecca had fallen asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The weight of uncertainty pressed against my chest, each breath tight and restrained. I could do what many men in my position might have done. Ignore it, pretend everything was fine, let time smooth over the rough edges. I turned my head and looked at my wife, sleeping soundly beside me. Something was happening. Something real. And I was going to find out exactly what it was. I wasn't the kind of man who invaded my wife's privacy. Trust was supposed to be the foundation of marriage. That's what I had always believed. But what happens when that foundation starts to crumble? When your wife comes home late, smelling like someone else's cologne. When she laughs at messages she never shares. When she turns away in bed, as if the thought of your touch disgusts her. That night, as I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the sound of the shower running in the bathroom, I finally accepted what I had been trying to ignore. Her phone sat on the nightstand, the screen dark and still. Then, a soft vibration. A message. I turned my head, my pulse quickening. I told myself not to look. But my hands had already moved before my mind could stop them. The screen lit up again. Unknown number. Ready for the hottest night of your life? Fire. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I just stared at it, willing the words to change, to mean something else. Anything else. With a tight grip, I picked up the phone and tapped the message. The conversation scrolled up, and what I saw made my skin crawl. Explicit. Flirtatious. Plans made in careful detail. And then the final, unforgivable message. Unknown number. Tomorrow is going to be legendary. These guys are something else. My husband could never compare. A strange stillness settled over me. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Just cold, unwavering clarity. Rebecca wasn't just cheating. She was mocking me behind my back. I placed the phone back exactly where I had found it, my mind eerily calm as I leaned back in the chair by the window, picking up a book as if I had been sitting there the whole time. Moments later, the water stopped. The sound of the shower door sliding open. The rustle of a towel. Rebecca stepped into the bedroom, steam trailing behind her, her damp blonde hair curling against her bare shoulders. She barely glanced at me as she walked toward the vanity, her fingers already reaching for her phone. She checked the screen. A small, satisfied smirk crossed her lips. She had no idea. Then, the phone rang. She looked at the caller ID, hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the decline button. I watched her through the mirror. "Not gonna answer?" I asked casually. Her body tensed for a split second before she forced a light smile. "Just a work call," she said, letting it ring a few more times before silencing it. She didn't decline it. She let it ring out. Then, as if she had forgotten I was even in the room, she turned slightly, her voice dropping as she spoke into the phone. "Hey," she said softly, almost playfully. A pause. A knowing smile. "Yeah, tomorrow's still on." She lowered her voice even further. "No, he's here. I can't talk long." A soft giggle. "I can't wait either." The heat in my chest burned, but I kept my expression steady. That was it. I could have confronted her right then. I could have shouted, thrown accusations, demanded answers. But I didn't. Because now, this wasn't just about knowing the truth. This was about revenge. Tomorrow, Rebecca would think she had won. She would go through with her little plans, enjoy her betrayal, bask in her deception. And tomorrow night, when she thought she was on top of the world, I would be there. Watching. Waiting. And when the moment was right, when she least expected it, I would make sure her entire world collapsed around her. She had no idea what was coming. I sat in my car outside the house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My mind raced, replaying every betrayal, every secretive glance, every chuckle she had given to someone that wasn't me. The rage inside me burned, coiling around my ribs like a vice, but I forced myself to breathe, to think. Anger wouldn't get me what I wanted. I needed something stronger. I needed control. Slowly, I exhaled, steadying my pulse. This wouldn't be some reckless explosion of emotion. If Rebecca thought she had outmaneuvered me, She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I stepped out of the car, my movements calm, precise. The house was dark and still. Rebecca had already fallen asleep, oblivious to what was coming. Good. I moved through the house with silent efficiency, straight toward the bedroom. Her nightstand sat in its usual place, untouched. And on it, a small orange pill bottle, the cap slightly loose from frequent use. Birth control. A safeguard she clearly didn't need anymore. I unscrewed the cap, carefully pouring the tiny white pills into my palm. Then, from my pocket, I pulled out identical-looking substitutes, sugar pills, harmless but useless. One by one, I replaced the real ones, ensuring that Rebecca would continue taking them without the slightest suspicion. By the time she realized the consequences of her actions, it would be far too late. Satisfied, I put the bottle back exactly as I had found it and moved on to the next step. Rebecca had underestimated me. She had assumed I would either stay in the dark or confront her in a fit of emotion. She didn't realize I had planned for this moment. From a locked drawer in my office, I pulled out a small box. Inside were sleek, nearly invisible security cameras, motion-activated, high-resolution, and capable of streaming footage straight to my phone. I had installed cameras once before for home security. No. They had a new purpose. Moving with careful precision, I placed them in strategic locations. One in the living room, subtly tucked between two books on the shelf. Another near the hallway entrance, angled to catch any movement. The final one, positioned behind a decorative vase near the TV stand, facing the couch, where I knew the main event would take place. By the time I was done, everything looked untouched, undisturbed. A perfect crime scene. Only this time, the criminal was the one who thought she'd never get caught. I checked the feed on my phone. Crisp visuals. Clear audio. Rebecca wouldn't see it coming. But just in case she tried to turn the tables on me later, I took one last precaution. Sitting at my desk, I opened a folder containing our financial records, joint assets, insurance policies, everything tying us together. With the careful eye of an engineer, I analyzed every detail, every loophole. I made copies, sent them to my personal email, even scheduled a consultation with my lawyer. Rebecca might think she was in control now, but she had no idea that I had already stripped her of any power she could try to wield against me. By the time I was finished, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. No longer was I the clueless husband, blindly trusting a woman who had already abandoned her loyalty. I was the storm on the horizon. And tomorrow, Rebecca would have her fun. She would laugh. She would drink. She would think she had won. And then, her world would burn. The night air was thick with the scent of spilled alcohol and sweat, the unmistakable stench of reckless indulgence. Through the live feed on my phone, I watched as Rebecca twirled around our living room in a half-drunken state, surrounded by three men. Her laugh echoed through the speakers, high-pitched and shameless. She was in our home, the one I had built, the one I had paid for, throwing herself at other men like I didn't exist. Glass clinked. Laughter filled the air. One of the men pulled her onto his lap, his hands settling on her waist like he had every right to touch her. And Rebecca. She didn't hesitate. She leaned in, her body pressing against his as if this was the most natural thing in the world. My jaw clenched. My grip on my phone tightened. But I didn't let the anger consume me. Not yet. I watched as she raised her drink, a sly grin spreading across her face. "You guys are so much better than my husband," she slurred, giggling as the others joined in on the joke. "He has no idea what he's missing." That was it. The final nail in the coffin. I shut off the stream, tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, and stepped out of my car. The house loomed in front of me, its windows glowing, shadows moving inside. I didn't storm in. I didn't make a scene. I simply walked up to my front door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. The second I did, the atmosphere shifted. The music was still playing, but the laughter had died. One by one, their heads turned toward me, the confidence draining from their faces as they processed what was happening. Rebecca was the last to notice. She was still draped over the guy's lap, her lips close to his ear, whispering something that made him smirk, until he saw me. His entire body tensed. Rebecca, oblivious, frowned at his reaction. "What's wrong?" she asked, turning her head. And then she saw me. Her entire body froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the remote control I had prepared earlier, and pointed it at the TV. With a single press of a button, the screen flickered to life. And then, the video started playing. Rebecca's voice filled the room, crystal clear, undeniable. "You guys are so much better than my husband. He has no idea what he's missing." Silence Point, one of the men, shot up from the couch like he had just been burned. Another ran a hand down his face, muttering, "Oh man," as if just now realizing the disaster he had walked into. Rebecca's face went pale. "Ethan, I raised a hand, cutting her off before she could even start. My expression was calm, cold. She knew. She knew there was nothing she could say that would fix this. Without a word, I turned and walked back toward the door. The night air was crisp as I grabbed the black duffel bag from my trunk, the one I had packed earlier. I carried it back up the driveway, past Rebecca's stunned audience, and straight onto the front lawn. Then, one by one, I started pulling everything out. Every designer dress. Every expensive purse. Every overpriced piece of jewelry. All of it. The gifts I had bought for my wife, the ones meant for someone who actually loved me, were now nothing more than reminders of a woman who no longer existed. Rebecca stumbled out onto the porch, panic setting in. "Ethan, stop." I ignored her. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out a silver lighter. Her eyes widened. "No," she whispered. "You can't." I flicked the lighter. A small flame danced to life, flickering in the darkness. Then, without hesitation, I tossed it onto the pile. Flames erupted instantly, swallowing the fabric, the leather, the lace. The fire climbed higher, devouring everything she had flaunted for years. Behind me, the men were already scrambling. One bolted toward the street. Another mumbled a frantic, "Dude, let's go." The last one barely made eye contact before disappearing into the night. Rebecca. She couldn't move. She stood frozen on the porch, her lips trembling, her breath shallow. You can't do this," she stammered, watching her expensive belongings burn. "You can't just." I turned to her, my voice icy. "This is my house," I said. "And you are no longer welcome here." The words hit harder than any screaming match ever could. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity. No regret. Just justice. I hadn't heard from Rebecca in months after that night. After I threw her out, she vanished from my life like a bad dream. No calls, no texts, nothing. I had expected a messy fight, a desperate attempt to crawl her way back in, but she must have realized there was no coming back from what she had done. Or so I thought. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and sorted through my mail, a thick envelope caught my eye. The return address. Family Court. I tore it open, my stomach twisting with a mix of irritation and amusement. And then I saw it. Petitioner, Rebecca Harper. Claim, child support. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. So this was her play. Rebecca was pregnant, and she was trying to pin it on me. Setting the letter down, I exhaled slowly, already knowing exactly how this would end. Did she really think I hadn't prepared for every possible move she could make? My next call was to my lawyer. The courtroom was sterile and cold, the white walls and polished wooden benches reflecting the harsh overhead lighting. The air smelled of disinfectant and tension. I sat at my designated spot, calm and composed. Across from me sat her. Rebecca looked different. The confident, flirtatious woman who had once paraded around my home, laughing at me behind my back, had been replaced. Her face was tired, her makeup overdone, like she was trying to hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. She sat with one hand cradling her stomach, the perfect image of a wronged woman. Her lawyer, a middle-aged man who probably thought this was an easy case, adjusted his tie before speaking. "Your Honor, my client, Rebecca Harper, is in a delicate state. She is expecting a child conceived within the timeline of her marriage to Mr. Harper. As such, we are seeking appropriate financial support." I didn't react. My lawyer, Evelyn Hawthorne, barely blinked. She stood with the kind of confidence that made men twice her size shrink in their seats. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said smoothly, "my client contests these claims. Given the circumstances of their separation, we request a paternity test before proceeding with any financial discussions." Rebecca tensed beside her lawyer. Her nails dug into her palms. "That's ridiculous," she snapped, her voice cracking. "Ethan, you know this is your child. We were still married." Evelyn's lips curled into the smallest smirk. "Married? Yes." She tilted her head. "Faithful? That's another question entirely." Rebecca's lawyer tried to object, but the judge, an older man with sharp eyes, raised a hand. "Overruled. Given the circumstances of the case, a paternity test is a reasonable request." He turned to Rebecca. "Mrs. Harper, if you claim this child belongs to your ex-husband, you should have no issue proving it." Rebecca's face drained of color. She knew. She knew exactly what was about to happen. Days later, I stood outside the courthouse, the test results in my hands. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Rebecca stood across from me, chewing on her lip, her hands fidgeting. She was nervous. "Good." I exhaled, then ripped open the envelope, scanning the text inside. 0% probability of paternity. Not even a chance. I let the words settle in, feeling a slow, victorious smirk spread across my face. Rebecca saw my expression shift, and her breath hitched. She rushed forward. "Ethan, listen." I held up the paper between us. "Read it." Her hands trembled as she snatched it, her eyes darting across the text. I watched as her face contorted, panic, devastation, and then, something uglier. Desperation. This can't be right," she whispered. "There must be a mistake. Maybe we need another test." I stepped closer, my voice low but cutting. "You really thought you could trap me?" Her breath came short and shallow. "You destroyed our marriage. You humiliated me in my own home. And now you're standing here, trying to rob me of a future that doesn't include you." Rebecca shook her head wildly, her eyes glistening. I didn't know, I swear. I thought—" "No," I interrupted, my voice like ice. "You thought you could milk me dry." I turned as Evelyn approached, holding another copy of the test results. "Mr. Harper," she said smoothly, "the judge has dismissed the case. You owe her nothing." Rebecca gasped. "Wait, what?" "No, there has to be something I can do." Evelyn adjusted her glasses. "You can find the actual father and take it up with him. But legally, Mr. Harper has no obligations to you." Rebecca turned back to me, her eyes wild, her breath shaky. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "I don't have anyone else." For the first time, I saw it, the true weight of her downfall crushing her. But I felt nothing. Not pity. Not anger. Just indifference. I tilted my head. "Then maybe," I said, turning to leave, "you should have thought about that before you ruined your own life." And with that, I walked away, never looking back. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.